and is no longer in place, and all grades will be decided, or all grades changes will be changed by human beings. There's no algorithm around that you heard about last year. Assessments can continue. We're going to be back in school this week, or next week I should say, which is fantastic. And students are only going to be judged and assessed on what they have been taught. We'll come back to parts of the spec a little bit later on. In terms of evidence, we are going to be very transparent and very clear with you once we know the rules about exactly what your grade is going to be decided on. We are not allowed to tell you what grade we send off on the 18th of June. We can't tell you that. But you will have a very, very clear idea about what we've based that judgment on in the lead up to that. So we're going to be very transparent in our processes. So what do we know at this stage about the evidence? You can see there some of the examples that are going to be included. Non-exam assessment, NEA, will still be continued with. And what I would say at this stage is that the rules are going to be slightly different for every subject. So there's not one rule for all of the subjects. You'll see that the art and design is going to be purely based on portfolio. PE will be judged slightly differently from history, from English, etc. But the types of evidence you can see are considered at the top. We are going to get extra materials given by the exam board, and I'll come back to that a little bit later on. And results and grades will be decided on work you've completed at any stage of your 2 years of study. There were some proposals in the original proposal consultation about assessment windows and only being taking work from a certain part of the course. That's not the case. We can take evidence from any part. On the right-hand side, then, you'll see the outcomes, so results days. Now, results days will be earlier than they are in normal years, and you can see the dates there. Last year, we had a very successful socially distanced results day, and at this stage, it's very much our intention to continue with that. There will be an appeals process if you're unhappy with your grade, and the first part of that will be checking with us that we've not committed a clerical error in submitting your grade. And then if you feel actually no, that grade is not representative of what I think I got, you can appeal directly to the exam board via ourselves. So we will be going through that. We'll publish the appeals process in due course. The other thing that's not on here but is in the consultation is that there is a proposal potentially to have another autumn series of exams. Those will run potentially in October and November, and they would be for students to sit the exams that they would have sat this summer in a subject that they want to improve on their teacher assessed grade. Again, once we have further information on that, we will publish it. So those are the key outcomes from the consultation. I'm going to move on at this stage to talk about the timeline. And as I said, if there's any questions, do put them into the chat. The timeline that you see here is split into columns. So I'm just going to talk through what each column is and give you some key dates. So you see on the left-hand side is a series of numbers. That's the weeks of the school year. You can see then the week beginning, and the column next to that is year 13, and the column next to that is for year 11. So I'm going to start towards the bottom, which is the end point for teacher assessed grades. You would have seen in the news that Friday the 18th of June is the exam board deadline for submitting grades. If anybody's ever worked in a school before or been involved in any of this process, you will know full well you do not leave it until Friday the 18th of June to submit your grades to the exam board. That is quite a long and extensive process with many levels of checking. So we will be dedicating that week, the week beginning the 14th, to all of the admin that is involved in submitting teacher assessed grades. I'm going to go back then to the top and work through week by week. And there's been some questions around term dates and about when year 11 and 13 may well finish. There's also been some questions around prom and leavers dinner and all those sorts of things. So I'll try my very best to remember them all for this part of the presentation. So students come back into school at week beginning the 8th, which, as I said, we are super excited about. And one of the things that we needed to decide is when do we stop teaching new content to the students? Now, for some courses at GCSE and A-level, they are pretty much finished, if not about to finish, if not already finished. But for other subjects, they've still got a number of weeks to go. It's very clear in the guidance that no student should ever be disadvantaged in moving on to the next stage of their education. And every student will be well versed and well able to get on. But there is a point where we need to be able to give the students an opportunity to revise old content and prove that the grades that they're working at. So what we've instructed our heads of department to do is that by Friday the 12th of March is the deadline for them as an instruction, not an instruction, but a guide to stop teaching new specification content. Only if they feel able that they've covered enough material to be able to soundly inform teacher assessed grades. If they think, yeah, we've covered well enough of the content, I can definitely assess teacher assessed grades with the content we've covered, then they may stop at that point. If they think, no, actually, I need to complete a little bit more because it's a synoptic course, for instance, then they are able to continue. But Friday the 12th is a guide to stop teaching new content. If your child is in year 11, and I'll just pick an example of chemistry, and there's 5% of the course or less that they just haven't covered. But do you know what? For those going on to A-level chemistry, that would be really useful. We've instructed our heads of department to deliver sessions after May half term to those students so that they can learn that content needed for A-level. Likewise, you may have a tiny bit of A-level maths that perhaps you just didn't quite get to, but you want it to go on to study degree level physics or degree level maths. And again, teachers, heads of department have been instructed to do that after May half term. We really hope that gives you reassurance. We had many questions that came in about if they're going to do new content all the way through the next 6-7 weeks, how on earth are they going to revise? We wanted to draw a line. And we wanted students to be able to focus then on getting ready for assessments and evidencing grades. If I deal with year 11 first, so after the week beginning, after the Friday the 12th, they then have 5 school weeks before their mock exams start, week beginning the 3rd of May. They're due to run for around 2 weeks. It may be that they stretch over slightly. We're just finalising the timetable as we speak, but they'll be around a 2-week period. Unlike the mocks they did in December, there will only be 2 slots per day. That's an 8:45 slot and a 2 p.m. slot. That gives them plenty of time in between to revise. That sort of mid-morning slot has gone. All subjects will also be done in subjects. So all history students, for instance, will be doing their history exam at exactly the same time. Study leave will be provided during that period as well, so students have got plenty of time to revise in and around their exams. I'll come to the grading period in a moment once I've dealt with year 13. Year 13, again, that new content deadline is around the Friday the 12th of March, and they then have 4 weeks before their mocks take place. Their mocks take place again around a 2-week period, and they will also take place in subjects. That's why it's a longer period than normal. So all the maths students will do paper 1 all at the same time, for instance. They'll also get study leave as per normal. We will accept new evidence, new assessment evidence up until Thursday, the 27th of May. Now, some of you have talked and asked the question about term dates. We can't give any definite answers about when year 11 and year 13 will finish their schooling. We've been given no guidance on that by the DFE, and it would be wrong for us to give you a date, which then we have to change in due course. In terms of the teacher assessed grades process, you can see there the deadline is the 27th of May. And therefore May half term may be a line in the sand for 11 and 13, but we can't promise that. So please don't go booking any big holidays this week beginning the 7th of June, because you may well still be in school. Once we know that information, we will of course publish that to you straight away, because I know lots of you are super keen to find that out. But the last time we'll accept evidence is Thursday the 27th of May. That means in the period after the mock exams, you will still have opportunities to be assessed by your teachers to gain those grades. You'll be in school, you'll be in lessons, you'll be working hard up until that date. The grading period there is the period when departments, and I'll go through the moderation process in a minute, when departments will be determining teacher assessed grades. They'll be going through the evidence of work, and they'll be putting together portfolios for each student of exactly the grade that they're going to send off. What follows after half term is the week beginning the 7th of June. It is our period of internal moderation when we go through all of the grades, and I'll talk about that process in a minute. Hopefully that provides some clarity around the calendar. I'm just going to go to the chat and just have a look at some questions that have come in. So and I'll pause at this stage. So if you do want to ask a question about the calendar, do feel free. I've got a really good question here about bias and how do we avoid bias when deciding teacher assessed grades. It's a really good question. Last year with centre assessed grades that we were asked to do, we were provided documentation before about how to avoid bias in deciding grades. That is publicised to staff, so when they're deciding their grades, they have that in mind. We also go through a rigorous and robust moderation process, which involves putting our grades through a computer system called Formatrix, which analyses our data in finite detail. And we will be, through that, the leadership team leading very close analysis to make sure that all of the key groups that may be affected by bias don't experience it. So it's a very, very thorough process. Fantastic. Just going through some. Yeah, I've got some questions about weighting of evidence and around mock exams and is that basically the grade and how it's going to be decided. Teacher assessed grades will not be decided on any one single piece of evidence. We've not yet got a number of how many pieces of evidence are required at this stage, but the mocks are just one part of the whole picture. We're aware that some students don't perform as they would like to in a mock. That's fine. It's a body of evidence that we're looking for to justify a grade. In terms of the reasoning behind still having those mock seasons, we think they're absolutely crucial to give the students an opportunity to show the grade they're working at. For year 13, they did a very small mock season back in the autumn term, and that was it. And for year 11, they sat their exams before Christmas. But we really wanted to give them the opportunity to show and prove what they've been doing. And we know they've been working towards it for a number of months now. Just going through some more questions as we go through. I've got some questions about when would you normally expect to finish teaching content of an A-level or a GCSE course. Do you know, that completely depends on the course. I'm a history teacher by trade, and I tend to finish around the Easter holidays, just perhaps before, if I can, a couple of weeks. For other subjects, they're done well in sort of early February. So that really just depends on the subjects. In terms of students requiring to attend school after May half term, again, as I've said, we don't have those dates at this stage, but we'll publish them as soon as we possibly do. In terms of period of study leave before the mocks begin, we will be teaching right up until the mocks begin. We feel the face-to-face learning time is absolutely crucial as we approach those mocks. Yeah, in terms of then what we'll be doing after those mocks, again, they will be lessons that will be taught. You will still be going over old content. There'll be assessments going on in class, so you will be kept very busy and on your toes up until the Thursday we got there. A couple of questions about Easter revision sessions. There will not be any Easter revision sessions this school year. We will, though, be publishing work for students to complete over the Easter break to prepare them for those exams. So they'll have plenty of work to do, but there won't be any Easter revision sessions this time. Just going through. A really good question actually about mock results. Will they get their mock results back? Absolutely. So in that period after their mock exams, the students will go through their mock papers with their teachers. Yeah, absolutely. Let's just have a look. So questions about standardisation across schools, which I'll come to in a few moments, and questions there about external moderation and about what materials are going to be used for their mocks. Yeah, I can answer that one. I'll come to the other two in a moment or two. So in terms of what the materials will be used for their mocks, we're still waiting for the exam boards to publish support documents, support guidance. and one of the things they're going to publish is exam questions, past ones, but also new ones as well. It'll be up for our heads of department to decide exactly what structure they use for those mock exams, but they will replicate the exams they would have sat this summer, although not the number of exams. I'm just going to go on for yeah, just questions around around lockdown, and if we did have to go into another lockdown, would mocks be done remotely? We do have some contingency plans in place that we could implement if so, but at this point in time, we are hopeful with the new testing regime that's coming in, etc., that we'll be in a really healthy position come then. But we have got contingency plans in place. Lovely. I'm gonna just go on for a moment and then come back to some questions. If I haven't answered your questions yet, then please don't worry, I will come to them at the end. I come on now to what I've called the knotty problem, which is assessment evidence. And as I'll say from the start, we are still awaiting guidance on this, but I just want to explain to you the complexities and why we're still waiting on guidance by using an analogy in a moment or two. I want you to imagine now, and I did this with the leadership team, I'm doing it with staff on Monday, that you've got Mo Farah. And Mo Farah is aiming to win Olympic gold in August. And his build up in the year or the 2 years before that is all about getting himself into peak condition to succeed in those Olympic finals. And he builds his whole year and his whole 2 years around peaking at that exact moment. Well, that's a little bit like our students started off in September 2019, in that they started off on a 2-year journey aiming to peak in June 2021. And everything they did along that journey was practice to try and get themselves ready for that final push. We know that in the midst or in the build up to those Olympics, that Mo Farah is going to be in intense training, exactly like our students are in training throughout their 2 years. But we get to the March before the Olympics, and Mo's told that actually your Olympics are cancelled. And what we're going to do, Mo, is judge your medal on the work that you've done in training since you started, and then some things over the next few weeks. That's actually kind of the situation our students have been put in terms of the goalpost changing. And our hearts do go out to them for this. The other part is, imagine that Mo had a series of injuries during his time getting ready for those Olympics. That's again a little bit like our students who have had times of school closures during this period. The evidence that you could use to judge Mo would be perhaps some of his training runs, but he would rightly say, well, hang on a minute, they would just practice for the final outcome. And also, I train differently to other people train, so how are you going to judge my training to their training? This is the questions that are now around about assessment evidence. What evidence do you consider? Is it exactly the same for every student? What's the range of evidence? What are the types of evidence? How much evidence? Should it be the same amount for every student? And that is what the exam boards are fine-tuning at this point in time. What do we definitely know at this stage, though? Well, we know what's different from last year to this year. So this is what we were asked to do last year as a school. We were basically asked to imagine that they had sat their exams and to make a judgment based on your professional experience of what you think they would have got in those exams. Now, one of the things that's come out and which kind of made me smile a little bit is this idea that this year they're going to be based on evidence. Well, last year they were based on evidence as well, of course. It wasn't that Terence opens the door nicely for us, so we're going to give him a grade 9. Of course not. They're all based on evidence. But last year it was very much, imagine they did do exams and use your experience to judge what they would have got based on evidence that you've seen so far. This year, it's different. So this year, you'll see it's very much not about their potential and what they could have gone on to achieve. It's very much the standard of what they're performing now. So our message to students over the next few weeks is absolutely you want to get the best possible evidence to show the grade that you're working on, but the teacher will work with you and help you. A little bit like Mo in my previous analogy, Mo will have a coach that knows him incredibly well and will know exactly what he needed to do to prove how good he was going to be in those Olympics. And that's exactly what our teachers will be doing over the next few weeks. They'll be working closely with you to make sure that you get that evidence to prove the grade that you're working at now. As soon as we have exact exam board guidance on all of those questions that I've raised, we will publish it to you. We will be incredibly transparent for every single subject about the evidence that we are considering, and we will put that into a document so it's clear for you all to see. We are sorry we can't give you any more exactly on that evidence, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of the sort of considerations that have been thought about at the moment. And here's the types of evidence that might well be considered at this stage. They're all the usual things that were mentioned on the off-qual picture earlier. I want to talk now about the idea of transparency, and a few people have asked about our moderation processes. We pride ourselves last year around the buzzwords of credibility and integrity, and those buzzwords absolutely still exist for us. We want to make sure every grade is fair and every grade is accurate. And I go back to Team County. We are absolutely all in this together, and we want the very best for the children at this school. So what are the internal moderation processes that we put in place? So first of all, every subject teacher will have to use the assessment evidence to inform a professional, holistic judgment. They will make that judgment based on the evidence that they have at hand. And of course, we will give them exact guidance when we have it about the evidence they're allowed to consider. And there will be a thorough internal department moderation to make sure that teacher Y, when they're awarding a grade 7 at GCSE, is the same standard of expectation that teacher X is deciding a grade 7 as well. There'll be a very thorough sharing of work, a very thorough moderation process to make sure those grades are accurate and fair. We then go to another stage where heads of department discuss with their teams every single grade. And our heads of department are very much the engine room of this process as they review all of the evidence upon which those grades are based. As I said towards the start, we submit just over 2,000 grades. And if you think that perhaps each grade may be evidenced by, let's say, 4, 5, 6 pieces of evidence, we're talking well towards 10,000 pieces. It's a really significant task that our teams are undertaking, but they'll do it incredibly thoroughly. The third stage of internal moderation is our leadership team, and we quality assure all of the departments. We look at all of the data that's been put forward, and we again go back to those buzzwords of credibility and integrity. So there's a 3-level moderation internal process. This year as well, there's a more thorough external moderation process that the exam boards have outlined. So every school in the country will have their internal process looked at to make sure it is thorough and that it's robust and it's rigorous. And we will be one of those schools, actually like every other one, that will be checked. And there will be a sampling of centres as well. And in those sample centres, they will send off work to make sure there's consistency across the country. The exam boards have been clear that they do expect some grade inflation this year because it's a different system, but they don't expect results for schools to be too much different to what they would normally get in an exam year. So there is a very thorough process. No student at County will be disadvantaged by the processes that we put in place. In fact, they'll be advantaged because they're so robust and they're going to get very fair grades. So that's the moderation processes that we're putting in place. I'm just going to go back to the chat for a few moments to see about questions that have come in. 38 questions, but some of them are duplicates. Got a couple of questions from Year 11 parents just around their mocks that they did in December, and will they get those papers back? Again, I apologise that we haven't been able to get those back to you, just the logistics during a pandemic, but absolutely in the first week or two back, they will get those papers and they will be able to see those papers. A few questions about looking after the students. And absolutely, we have a great pastoral team here led by Helen Nerton in the sixth form and Dave Ayres in year 11. And they will be absolutely checking in, looking after the students. And that's why at the start I talked about the fun bits. You know, coming back to school is going to be really exciting. You're going to see lots of smiles. Of course, there's going to be nervousness about coming back and the process, but we are absolutely there to support all of the students. Topics for mock exams, absolutely, they'll be publicised by your teachers very shortly. They're just fine-tuning exactly what's going to be in their mocks, and they will be there to clear for you. A couple of questions on consolidating on work and maybe some miscommunication or misunderstanding. Year 11 and year 13 will have study leave, but just like if they had done their actual exams in the summer, we will be teaching up until that study leave begins. Study leave, many schools has gone actually. We're one of the ones that still absolutely believe in it and believe in its values. But we will be, because we're bringing in that content deadline, we will make sure that they've got plenty of lessons as well, where they get real top quality teaching in terms of revision. Yeah, some questions again around sort of lockdown and self-isolation during mock periods. So we've got some contingency plans in there if that is the case. We obviously desperately hope it isn't, but we will very much do that. Just seeing some other questions come in. Please could we see the evidence before the summary? Yeah, absolutely. I'll go back to the evidence slide so you can see the types of evidence just while I go through a few more questions. So good questions about the quality of evidence versus the amount of evidence. And as I said, we're just waiting for that final guidance for the exam boards. And there's a really good question about grade boundaries for these mocks. There's fantastic questions, because of course grade boundaries are unique to a particular year. We as well are going to get guidance from the exam boards about exactly how we should be grading. So that will come out in our next guidance. Will the mocks in December form part of the evidence? And again, that comes back to that evidence question. We very much are waiting for that guidance from the exam boards. One point a couple of people made is about, well, these students have had a very different 2 years to a normal year, and will that be taken into account? The wording from the consultation outcomes is that no student should find it any easier or any harder to achieve a grade as in a normal year. And as I said earlier, they're expecting schools to roughly get, perhaps a little bit inflated, but roughly get the grades they would normally expect to get in a summer examinations. So that will be reflected within the grades. Hopefully I've covered that one on grade boundaries. Database. Yeah, some questions here about how we actually submit the grades to the exam boards. So again, we're waiting for guidance on that. But if we take last year's example, last year for every student, we just submitted a grade for that subject. So, for history, I submitted a grade 8 for student X, a grade 5 for student Y, and so forth. In terms of the evidence upon which that grade has been decided, that would come if we're moderated or if there's an appeal of any sort. Yeah, just to clarify, so it's a good question about, so to confirm, no evidence will be considered after May half term. That is correct. No evidence will be considered after May half term. Question about sixth form and private study, which I'll pass on to Mrs. Nerton after the session. She'll be able to get back to you on that. And I'll come back to some questions in a moment or two before I go through the next part. I just want to talk a little bit more about transparency. I'm going to put a picture on the board of who's become a personal favourite man in our household in recent months. That's Mr. Chris Whitty. In fact, I was looking at some Valentine's cards the other week that you can now get Chris Whitty Valentine's cards, and there's some words that rhyme with Whitty that have been put in there for him. It's quite incredible. He's become quite a star. But one thing, of course, which is so synonymous with the daily briefings is the evidence that they bring along. And as I've mentioned a few times, all of our decisions will be evidence-based. But I come to the issue of communication with staff about this process. This is, as I've said at the start, a process that no teacher ever signed up to. we signed up to teach and do many wonderful things, but to decide the students' grades was not something, although it's common in other countries, is not something that we signed up to. And submitting just over 2,000 grades is quite an undertaking. We don't expect that any parent or any student would pressure a staff member around this process, and we will be quite firm on that. We'll ask you not to put any pressure on a member of staff, and we've informed staff that if they do feel at any point pressured around this, that they must let the leadership team know who will take it over. We ask you if you've got any inquiries about teacher assessment grades, that they come to myself to protect staff from an avalanche of communication, and we don't expect staff to come under any pressure. We're going to be incredibly transparent about our processes, about how we're going about it, how we're evidencing it, and hopefully that will help. And I do appreciate there will be questions upon the way, but it's really important that our staff feel protected as they go through this. I'm just going to go back to the chat before I go on to the last sort of slide or two, because there are some more questions coming in. Some questions about the year 13 remote assessments and whether they will be considered as evidence. And again, that will come down to the final wording from the exam board and whether it will only be work done in school or not. But as soon as we have that, we will let you know. And some more questions coming in. Yeah, some good questions about will you use the same evidence for each child? And this is a really good question. You get in school those that are perhaps hitting the grade they want to get in the summer much earlier than other students, because we're all trying to peak at the very end. And one of the questions that exam boards are considering at this exact moment is exactly that. Will we have to use exactly the same evidence for each child? Again, once we have the answer to that, we'll let you know. One question. Yeah, a really good question about special consideration. And those that normally get special consideration in terms of exam arrangements, they still very much were in place last year, but we'll wait for exact guidance on that. Got a question here about classes and if a whole class receives a very low grade in a specific subject. Again, that's why we do huge amounts of internal moderation to make sure the grades are fair and accurate. Yeah, some questions here about exam boards and will grades be changed by exam boards? So you'll notice in the letter that we sent out on Friday that indicated that the grade we submit might not be the grade the exam boards give the students in the end. We've had that clarified over the last couple of days, and we don't expect that to be the case in exceptional circumstances. So we should, the grades that we submit should be the final grades, because they'll be quality assuring our processes as a school early on. That should be avoided. So that's really good news. Last year, of course, with the algorithm, we didn't have that. A few questions around interim reports, and I know year 13 just got their interim report in the last few days, sort of historic one from a week or so ago. On that report, the likely grade was missing, because at this stage it would be foolish of us to commit to any sort of likely grade. These grades, we have to evidence them, we have to make sure we're absolutely clear. The likely is always just that, it's a prediction, it's a possibility they might get in their exams, but of course they're not sitting their exams anymore. It's our intention not to publish now any more interim report data for 11 and 13 from here onwards, not to muddy the water at any point, just purely focus on getting this evidence for the grades. I think I'm rolling towards the end of the questions. Yeah, so access arrangements still exist for these mocks. So if you use a laptop, then absolutely you'll be able to use a laptop in the exams that are coming up. My final slide is coming up now, and it goes back to that idea of team county. We absolutely, as I said at the start, are all in this together. We have the absolute best interests of your children at heart. Our hearts go out to the current 11 and 13 because they've had such a disrupted 2 years of their studies. But we absolutely now want to get them the grades that they deserve, and we'll be working our absolute socks off, as they will, to make sure that we get them there. We wish them all the very best of luck. And as Mr. Smith said, please do get in touch at any point. Our door is absolutely still open. I'm just going to take any last questions that come in. So there's questions around sort of grading, around practical grading for chemistry and physics, and we'll give exact guidance on that coming up, but there will be a grade that's put in for that. Will grade boundaries be compared? Yeah, and again, grade boundaries and around that, we'll talk about once the exam boards publish that. Once the recording has been fine-tuned and I found it on the computer, we'll publish exactly where that is on the website. And there's just a couple of questions that have come in here around, could we get a lower grade than we got in our mocks? That's a really good question. One of the questions we've got as a school, which we're waiting for guidance on, is does every single piece of evidence have to be of that particular grade to be awarded it? And once we know that, again, we will publish that to you. A couple of last questions just reminded me about prom and Year 11 celebrations and Leavers Day. Of course, that's not the exact point of this session, but I will address it anyway. We will do what we can do. We sadly had to cancel both events last summer. And if the public health restrictions allow us to do an event of some sort, we absolutely will do some event. But of course, we are completely dependent on public health. So our heart wants to do it. If we can, we absolutely will do it. But we can't, unfortunately, put a date in the diary at this stage. I'm sure there are questions there that I may well have missed in the chat, or something that perhaps you feel I just want a little bit more clarification on. Please do feel free to drop me an email at any point, and I will happily answer those for you. I wish you, the students, the very best of luck on returning next week. Have a lovely evening, and I hope this was informative. Take care, and we'll see you all again soon.